This is Charlie Pellerin, and welcome to part 2 of our briefing 4D Performance Enhancement and Risk Mitigation. We pick up right after the end of part 1 with slide number 8, Assessment Report Highlights. Technical teams dislike assessments that are lengthy opinion surveys. While these assessments may be interesting for management or human resource organizations, the reports are generally ineffective in enhancing team performance. They fail to identify performance-enhancing action items teams can take. Our brief assessments, measuring only 8 team behavioral norms, provide actionable data. Note, this 8 behavior measurement is also the most accurate. Measuring additional behaviors would reduce the precision. The first of these is the team's overall performance benchmark. Teams can decide if their performance is adequate for their task. In this example, the team is performing at 78 efficiency in the above-average quintile. Is that performance level good enough? For many teams, it would be. This performance level would not be adequate for teams launching humans into space. It would not be adequate for a design team releasing a complex system like an automobile into production. The next data product is an anonymous histogram of individuals' perceptions of the team. The pattern in this example is typical. You see a consensus perspective that the team is in the above-average quintile, consistent with the benchmark. However, there are a few out-of-family respondents deep in the red. We urge team leaders to ask these people to meet with them and discuss what is troubling them. We also suggest that they approach these individuals, if they can guess who they are, with a mindset of general curiosity. It is in everybody's interest, and most especially the troubled individuals, for the team leader to take appropriate and supportive action. The third image shows the team's relative ranking for each of the 8 behaviors. In this example, you can see the team has a relatively low score and avoids blaming and complaining. A 4D client program manager, which we call CPM, or 4D certified coach, should offer this training module using slides from our 3-day workshop. Slide 9, Bottom Quintile Teams. My colleague Skip Borst graphed the progress of the approximately 40 teams with multiple assessments that began in the bottom quintile. Note, you might notice the slight offset of the gray diamond from the center of the quintile. This is because teams who began in the lowest part of the bottom quintile were more likely to conduct multiple reassessments than teams that began higher up. I draw no conclusion from this. I just wanted you to know the offset is a real effect and not some kind of error in our analysis. The first small triangle to the right shows the average progress teams realized with their first reassessment. The ever-larging triangles show progress with each subsequent reassessment. Frankly, I was astounded to see the consistency in the score improvements. These data are for teams beginning in the bottom quintile with lots of, quote, room to grow. Is the pattern consistent for teams starting in the other quintiles? Slide 10. Average progress of all 198 NASA teams. We begin with the same data as the previous chart. This is the entire set of NASA teams with multiple reassessments. The numbers under the diamonds and triangles are the assessment scores, which I believe are reliable estimates of the team's working efficiency. I can offer 2 pieces of evidence for this claim. First, we have hundreds of reports from NASA team leaders confirming strong correlation of assessment scores with team performance and customer relations. The second argument goes as follows. Imagine a team where every member scored every behavior as never meets the standard, a score of 0%. It's obvious to me, and I hope to you as well, that such a team would find it impossible to do teamwork at any level. Conversely, imagine a team where every member scored every behavior as fully meets the standard, which we would score as 100%. This would be an optimal working context. Research data, see books like Training 8 Performance, ASTD publishers, shows that the context or environment drives team performance approximately 80% of the time. Individual abilities have an approximately 10% influence. Therefore, if a team score of 0 would be 0% team efficient, and a score of 100% would be 100% team efficient, the remaining question would be the nature of the line that connects the two ends. I believe the curve is probably an S-curve, but I have no way to calculate this. So I invoke Occam's razor, which says the simplest assumption is the most likely one, and assume a straight line. We now see the same pattern for teams that began in the next quintile, and the same pattern for teams that began in the middle quintile. The question now is, will the pattern continue as we go up to where there's very little room for improvement? Astoundingly, it does. I note that the average improvement for the 60% of teams that began in the bottom 3 quintiles is 5% per TDA cycle. This is amazing to me. When I saw this chart, I decided to stop and write how NASA builds teams. I felt compelled to share these astounding results with the world. Slide number 11, Team Development Assessment Cycle. You might note these color codes relate to the 4 dimensions that I showed you in part 1. What makes these brief assessments so incredibly powerful? Actually, I was not completely clear about why when I wrote how NASA builds teams. I now understand the efficacy of this process in terms of the 4 dimensions and team social context. Moreover, I believe we will have even more impressive results in the future, because future team participants, assessment participants, now receive or can receive a copy of how NASA builds teams before they perform their assessment. Note, the book was not available when we collected most of these data. The book provides a powerful green and blue learning experience, as the 4D system ensures complete alignment between the book and the assessments. We now examine the online assessment. Each of the 8 behaviors in the assessment begins with an explanation of why we are measuring the behavior, including an example from my business or life experiences. Next, we present the standard participants used to assess the behavior. We originally chose to measure behavior against standards in order to mitigate the phenomenon that caused challenge explosion, normalization of deviance, which I mentioned earlier. I now realize that we created an important learning experience for assessment participants. Looking at the standard provides a summary of what good looks like, and where attention goes, power flows. Next, participants then write the comments that explain the rationale for their assessment choice. This completes part 1 of the assessment, the online version. Part 2 begins when our client program managers or certified coaches brief TDA reports to team leaders. Team leaders, in turn, present and discuss the TDA report with their team members. Finally, the teams develop performance-enhancing action items. We have brought team building, implemented by the team members, into their normal workaday context. Once you fully understand the power of context, it is obvious why this overall process is so much more effective than going off-site and then trying to bring the learning into a different context, their workplace. Chart 12, slide 12, NASA voluntary participation from 2003 to 2009. When we began working with NASA projects in 2003, one of our ground rules was that we would only work with team leaders who wanted to use these processes. We understood from the start that we would only be effective when the team leaders wanted performance enhancement using tools like managing team social context. However, we never imagined the enormous and enthusiastic voluntary response of time-stressed NASA project engineering and management teams that you see in this slide. These data speak for themselves. Slide 13, culture-wide performance enhancement. One day, Skip noticed something intriguing. Assessment scores for teams we were assessing for the first time seemed to be creeping up with time. He proceeded with a statistically rigorous analysis that included a student t-test that validated the trend at about 10%. It appeared that our work was systemically improving the performance across NASA. However, as a scientist, I know that correlation is not causality. Although I was certain NASA was becoming an ever more difficult place to work, I needed another test. I knew that we had done more work at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama than any other NASA facility. I then recalled a story my colleague Frank Martin told me about a Marshall workshop. A participant jumped up with a 4D laminate in his hand and said, "I returned to Marshall Engineering after being gone for 18 months and found a completely different place. For the first time, I actually enjoy working here." Skip then separated the Marshall data and found the result on the graph. This may be the first quantitative evidence of real cultural change. It is also interesting to note that the organization-wide improvement is proportional to the level of participation. The final display superimposes the two curves so you can see them together. If you're using a paper handout, you should delete this as it will just be confusing. Slide 14, TDA process initiation. Setting up TDAs is one of the more difficult tasks you will encounter. The problem is that many team leaders think of assessments as measurement tools and not as the powerful developmental processes that ours actually are. This is because prior assessments had no developmental force. Team leaders may try to include members outside the team, like customers, ask that you have sub-teams assess their larger team instead of their sub-team, or request assessments with more participants as those within a single supervisor's span of control. If you give in to any of these requests, you will surely regret it later. Changing assessments after they close is like trying to, quote, put the toothpaste back in the tube. Only set up assessments organized by groups with a single identified supervisor or team leader. This is the only way you can use assessment data to develop the team social context/performance. If you include outsiders such as customers, unless the team leader intends to include them during his team's TDA report, briefing/discussion, and subsequent developmental activities, these outsiders will dilute the effectiveness of the TDA activity. Getting this right is so important. We have written a process, TDA1, TDA Participant Selection Guidelines. Be sure to review this process at our website, http://processes.4dsystems.com, with username and passwords 4D Systems. Slide 15, Team Performance Enhancement Options. You have two basic options to work with your 4D clients. The first is for you to provide the full suite of 4D services just as we do for NASA teams. Note, if you are a 4D consultant or CPM, you need to enter a strategic alliance with a 4D certified coaching entity to provide coaching services. The second option is supporting your client in becoming a 4D network member. Our website, which anyone can reach by searching on nasateambuilding.com, describes the process. We envision your continued support for the client as a 4D consultant and/or 4D coach. You bill them at your hourly rates for whatever services you negotiate with them. If they decide to self-manage assessments, we bill them at the network member prices and provide you a 25% commission for as long as you have any relationship with them. This is the make money while you sleep option. You might at this point want to invite prospective clients to calculate the ROI on TDAs with you in real time. I estimate that the full service cost of a TDA cycle is outlined in Item 1 at about $2,000 US using our commercial rates. The TDA data show that all teams in the bottom three quintiles, or 60% of all teams, realize an average performance enhancement of 5% each team assessment cycle. Note, we repeat these assessments every 4 to 6 months for NASA project engineering and management teams. We have conducted TDAs as often as every 3 weeks for some proposal teams, as they only work full up for about 4 months. Therefore, you can take the total labor cost of their team over 6 months for a typical team, multiply it by 5%, then by 0.6 to get a conservative estimate of the average savings. Typical savings are $75,000 to $100,000 for teams we work with. Dividing by 2,000 produces gigantic ROIs. There are also other benefits not in this calculation. These include reduced risk of technical failure and improved customer relationships. If your clients remain skeptical, ask them whether it would be worth $2,000 to, quote, do the experiment.